Welcome to our discussion of Parashat Behar-Behukotai, the parsha that deals with the commandments relating to Shemitah and Bechukotai as well. But I'd like to focus on the last pasuk of Parashat Behar. Et Shabbatotai tishmoru umikdashi tirau ani Hashem. My Shabbatot, you should guard and keep, and my holy place you should fear from. I am the Lord. I'd like to explore the meaning of that pasuk and its context within this parsha, and then to explore the broader question: what is the meaning of Shabbat in general? This pasuk is very mysterious because it appears in different forms 3 times within the framework of these holiness parshiot. Parsha of Kedoshim, known by the word holiness. There it begins with Ishaviv v'imo tirau v'et Shabbatotai tishmoru. It says that we should honor our parents and guard the Sabbath, as it says here. Perek Yud Tet, chapter 19, verse 30, the end of Parshat Kedoshim, toward the end of the first chapter, it also says this same exact pasuk. Et Shabbatotai tishmoru umikdashi tirau. Observe the Shabbat and guard my sanctuary. This verse appears elsewhere. Very strange, a unique verse, and yet it appears 2 times within the framework of just 2 parshiot. And a very similar pasuk, the beginning of Kedoshim, 3 times. Et Shabbatotai tishmoru, guard my Shabbat. Why? The Ramban on Parashat Kedoshim says that Hazarot b'Shabbat rabot b'Torah, that in the Torah we constantly talking about the importance of Shabbat. In the end of Shemot, it just constantly mentioned, K'mo b'avodah zarah, just as many times it warns us not to worship idols. Mipnei shegam hi shkula k'neged kol hamitzvot. Because Shabbat and idol worship are central. They are so important that it's like the whole Torah is included in this mitzvah of Shabbat. The notion of the relationship between Shabbatotai and Mikdashi, that we should observe the Shabbat and observe the holy sanctuary, we should guard and be in fear and in awe of the holy sanctuary. This relationship between Shabbos and Mikdash, Shabbat and the holy temple in Jerusalem or where it may be, is explained by the Ibn Ezra on Behar. He says, V'hinei hizkir hayom hanivchar, V'gam hizkir hamakom hanivchar. The Torah mentions the chosen time, the chosen day, and the chosen place. In the words of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, there is a sanctuary in space, that's the holy temple, the Beit HaMikdash, and there's a holy sanctuary in time, a temple in time, that's Shabbat. This is found in much in the Hasidic writings of the Sfat Emet and others. The notion of a relationship between Shabbat and the Beit HaMikdash, Shabbat and the Holy Temple, as temples in time and in space. This Chizkuni, one of the French commentators, based on an earlier French commentary, Rabbi Yosef Bechor, says the Kadosh the kavu yoter, that the mikdash is even more kavua yoter, it's more affixed. If you go into the holy sanctuary, you can go any day of the week. That holy temple in space is there all the time. But Shabbat in time is only once a week. In that sense, the mikdashi, the holy space, is greater than the holy time. The Chizkuni, based on Rabbi Yosef Bechor, French commentators. Now, when it says that you should guard my Shabbatot, in this context of this parsha, it's very ambiguous. Because we've been talking about not Shabbat Bereshit, not the 7th day of the week. We've been speaking about a different Shabbat. We've been speaking about the Shabbat every 7 years, the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. And the sabbatical year could be the meaning of this pasuk. Or is it talking about the Shabbat of every 7 days, what we call Shabbat Bereshit, Shabbat of Genesis? Which one is it referring to? Earlier on in Parshat Kedoshim, there's no reason not to assume that it's talking about what we usually call Shabbat, the seventh day of the week. But here, in the context of a whole Parsha discussing the sabbatical year and the like, seems more likely that perhaps it refers to Shemitah. The Chizkuni, again, this French commentator, a little after Rashi, he mentions that the Targum Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem translation, the Aramaic translation of the Torah, which we don't have in that version, it says that this verse refers to the Shemitah, the sabbatical years. But our Aramaic translation, the Onkelos, he says that refers to Yomei Shavaya, namely the Shabbat itself, the day of Shabbat. This ambiguity as to whether Shabbat in the Torah refers to Shabbat of the seventh day or Shabbat of the seventh year is found in many places. In the end of Parshat Mishpatim, there's a discussion of the holidays, and it's ambiguous there. In the end of the Parshat Ki Tisa, there's a discussion of the holidays, and the question of what the 6 days and the seventh day referred to, whether it's the 6 days of the week or the 6 days of the 7-year cycle, there's some ambiguity. In other words, there's really an overlap. There's a commonality between Shabbat of Genesis and the Shabbat of the 7 years. Every 7 years, it becomes a Shabbat for a whole year. It's really the same holiday. Just one is for a day, and it's every seventh day, and one is every seventh year in the Holy Land of Israel. As Ibn Ezra says, Shabbat and Shemitah are both blessed times. Their meaning, they are prone to holiness. What does it mean that the seventh year is holy? Shabbat Lashem, it's for God. What does it mean that Vayevarach Elokim et Yom HaShvi, Vayikadesh Oto, God sanctified, blessed the seventh day? God made it sanctified the seventh day. What does that mean? It means, says Ibn Ezra, that it's more prone to holiness, to thought. And that explains why at the end of the sabbatical year, there's a special ceremony, a gathering of all the tribes of Israel, all the Jewish people, men, women, and children, to gather and to hear the Torah read by the king, by the leader. Why? Because the seventh year is a time to focus on the Torah, to receive the Torah yet again. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, instituted that on Shabbat, we have a major reading of the Torah, the entire Parsha, because it's a good day, as Ibn Ezra says. It's blessed with it, endowed with a spirituality and a potentiality for great holiness and great spirituality. That's what Shabbat is all about. Now, we mentioned that this verse appears in several places. Beginning of Kedoshim, the middle of Kedoshim, and the end of this Parsha. Why? Sforno says that here, the idea of Shabbat and the idea of the temple has a different meaning. Because as we go from this Parashat Behar, speaking of the ideal sabbatical year and the Jubilee year and the ancient times where they had both the 7th year was holy, the 50th year was holy. But then the Parsha deteriorates. What if your brother becomes poor? What happens if those who live among you become wealthy and you become poor, your own brother is poor? Well, you have to redeem his field.